Best I can do.
And hey, we're live, folks. A little bit later than usual. We were just having a few random conversations with ourselves about who was on brand and who wasn't in terms of the clothing department. So welcome. It's another episode of Men as Allies, and I am joined again by the fabulous trio, Matt, Dan, and Mark, for another conversation without blame. Just, it is a conversation. It's about understanding. It's about, just that really. So welcome, guys. So I think tonight's question really is actually deceptively simple. Who holds the line? But I think, we've all had moments, all of us, and that's not just men, that's all of us, where something hasn't sat right. And it's that split second of, do we say something? Do we not say anything? Or we've just gone over our heads and we've completely missed it, or only had half an ear on it. But look, this isn't about, as I say, this is a conversation. This is not men versus women. This is not about blame. It's not about heroics. It's not about pointing or calling people out. This is about conversation, about that moment where who is holding that line, and what that presentation, that uncertainty, that the responsibility, and then what happens next, and the culture in those ordinary moments. So Mark's post, that one that went viral, and again your post earlier today, Mark, talking about the reaction, the unexpected reaction. I think because what it exposed wasn't just disagreement, but it was just that tension. Some people heard lived experience, others heard accusation. And I guess that's half the challenge, where some others are just literally sharing their experiences. So I guess, Mark, I'm going to throw it to you, because obviously a lot of this conversation started with the post. And I will drop the post in for anybody who has not seen it. So Mark can raise his impressions, but I think we all have been absolutely curious. I don't know, by the response, I guess. I don't know. Over to you, Mark.
I suppose it's time to be curious about it. I think curious is a good way to approach it. Like, the post was designed to have a conversation, but obviously people thought they were being called out, with the intention was to call people in to the conversation and see where we can go. But I suppose like some women were offended on behalf of men that they knew by the post as well, which I think has to be acknowledged as well in the point, right? But then the majority of comments were women being seen and said, "This is my experience. This is my lived experience." So I think we have to acknowledge that. And it begs the question about, it's competing realities in many ways. And that's why today I was talking about, I'd love to have people who disagreed come into the conversation, because we can talk, but we become an echo chamber if we all agree all the time, whereas if we don't agree, then we have a direction of travel to find a place where we can agree and that we can work from and we can work towards. And if you feel that you're being attacked, well, then you're going to defend yourself, as opposed to, and so therefore I think in that regard, the post can't work, because if you're feeling attacked, you're only going to defend yourself. You're not going to, are you going to take the time to go, oh, why do I feel like I'm being attacked? What does this mean? And that's where I'd love us to get to in the conversation. But it starts at that point, which is absolutely ironic, given we're talking about women's safety and it's men who are attacked. Which is kind of sad at the same time that we're in that space. But again, it goes to show, and it's just something I was only thinking about there, and it was only from, look, because of that manosphere thing that Louis Theroux did there a month or so ago, there's a lot of that kind of conversation around there, like, and I'm seeing a lot of that kind of thing. And it's back to, I think Dan was saying this the last day when we were talking about how men are lacking identity and don't know what it is. So they're trying to defend themselves in the space as well, and trying to find male identity and feel that that's under attack. And I suppose then is the question, is maybe that's the question we start with, like, when you talk about who holds the line, is masculine identity or is the male identity under attack?
And it's such a big question, though, and I'm going to throw it over to Dan and Matt, really, because I guess I know you'll both have a thought on this. Matt, I'll start with your thoughts.
My thoughts. Is masculinity under attack? I think it's just not clear. And the thing that frustrates me a little bit is media feeds off controversy, right? And we're talking about this post of Mark that was, without intending to be, controversial. And that fed traffic, that fed reaction, that fed all of this. But the problem is, we've seen it, say, 12 months ago with adolescents and all the conversation about social media, and not just boys with that one, but just general online social media work. Now we've had the manosphere and all the conversation about that. But I guess the thing that worries me is that conversation fades away. Like, there's the immediate kind of, whoa, and everyone gets all het up about it. And then the next headline comes in and we all move on. And has the conversation moved forwards? Has anything materially changed? No. So I guess that's what I'm feeling at the moment. But masculine identity isn't clear because of all of this noise going on at the moment. And I guess I'm obviously very keen to hear Dan's view on this as well, given his specialisms. But whenever I speak to men, and I'm increasingly trying to do that, trying to step into a place where men do feel safe, because I'm linking up with, in my area, local men's groups for different things, men's walking groups, men's talking groups, men's socializing groups, etc. And there is a real confusion, I think, of what it is to be male. And that, to Mark's point, doesn't help the conversation when we're trying to help women feel safer, but men feel under attack because they're feeling insecure insecure is the wrong word, unclear of their position and unclear of their role, and feeling that there's the suggestion that in some way it's their fault. I don't know. What's your perspective, Dan?
Yeah, and that what you said there, I think, Matt, is the most interesting bit. And it was what interests me most about the response to Mark's post, is that when we talk about these things and we talk about this stuff and we talk about how we don't want the world to be this way and we want to change and we want to do things differently, some men feel like they're being blamed. Now, a lot of the response to Mark's post was men feeling like they were somehow responsible when they've never attacked a woman in their life, they've never behaved in a predatory way, or perhaps they might have done a little bit, which is why they're so defensive. But right, and we've all done things we're not proud of in that arena. But I think that's the most interesting thing, is that some people feel, or some men feel like they're being blamed, right? And I imagine that some of the content around it is a bit blaming of men, is a bit hating on men, and probably goes too far the wrong way. So in my group, we've had a couple of discussions about feminism, right? Some of the guys completely and utterly misunderstood what feminism is. They think feminism is anti-men. Feminism is we want a world without men. Feminism is women should be running the show and men should F off out of the way. Feminism is equality, equity. It's none of those things. But yet some of the guys would then post things in the group and show me what ostensibly looks like feminist content, and F me, it does hate men, and it does blame men, and it does tell us we should all be ashamed and guilty because of the state of the world. Now that is so unhelpful too. And I think this is what leaves men scratching their heads, right? Decent, honest, good men scratching their heads thinking, well, what's wanted from me in this space, right? You know, we all have masculine drives as men, right? They protect and provide, and they're inherent within us. They're adaptation, they're, you know, behavior adaptations that have spanned hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution. We can't just drop them and forget them and pretend they don't exist. But at the same time, we've got to ensure that they don't take us somewhere dangerous, where they don't become toxic, right? And I don't like the phrase toxic masculinity, again, because it's been hijacked and it's been used to bash men over the head with. But this is what we're talking about here, without, you know, labeling it and giving it that name. When those drives, when we forget actually, and most of this debate forgets, there's masculine and feminine in every single one of us. We are all made up of both. It's yin and yang, right? So men don't just have masculine energy and females have feminine energy. That's not how it works. We all have both, right? And as Laura points out quite regularly, there is much more that unites us. There's much more that's similar than different. But we like to focus on the different, don't we, in our culture and in this debate. And what's really difficult is to call men into the conversation, to have a reasonable conversation about what we can do when they're feeling attacked, when they're feeling marginalized, and they're feeling left out, and they're very confused about what the world wants from them. So it's a really difficult conversation to have. I find it really difficult to have the conversations in my group, and I encourage it. And when I get the opportunity to, I do it. Now, recently, I spoke to somebody who runs a women's group, and she contacted me and said, look, I want to bring our two groups together. I want to have a discussion. I want to get around a table where it's safe and we can talk about these issues. I thought, great, brilliant. Straight in my group, fellas, got this opportunity. Tumbleweed. Send it to my email list. Chaps, I've got this brilliant opportunity. We can sit in a room and have a proper discussion about this with women and find out how we can meet each other halfway. Tumbleweed, nothing. Then I've got one guy in my group who has since left, attacking women, talking about feminism, blah, blah, blah. And as soon as they play 5 sets, then they can have equal pay in tennis. And I was like, mate, this is not how this group operates. We build people up, we don't tear them down. And he politely left a couple of days later. But this is what we're dealing with, Laura, right? Now, the men in my group are decent, reasonable men who are in that group because they want to be better. Yet none of them, not one of them, wanted to engage with this conversation. Not one of them. Now, there's probably a lot of reasons for that, because they don't feel safe doing so. They're worried about being judged, and they are worried about being blamed, or at least feeling like they're being blamed. It's not this culture that we live in is not our responsibility. We didn't create it. We are all conditioned by it and part of it, and I don't like using the word, but victims of it, if you like. But the only way we're going to change it is together. If we're prepared to have a conversation, if we're prepared to sit with feeling attacked and asking, and I've done it. I've been triggered by things people have said before. And I've seen myself going, actually, do you know, statistically, it's more likely that men are going to be victims of violence. And then I go, whoa, where's that come from? What are you doing there? What's that got to do with anything? What's that got to do with how women feel? What's that got to do with, you know, how we operate in our culture and day to day and what we do and don't? But it's taken me years of introspective and internal work to get to a place where I'm self-aware enough to spot that, and then ask myself the question and go, where's that come? What am I doing? What am I defending here? And I think as men, that's what we need to do now. We need to sit with that feeling of guilt if it pricks our conscience like that and go, right, well, why am I feeling guilty? Have I ever done anything wrong? Have I contributed to this? Have I let things slide when I shouldn't have done? Have I not spoken up when I could have done? We've got to search our souls, Laura. If we don't have these conversations, nothing changes. None of us want to live in a world where our wives and our daughters and our mothers and our sisters and our friends don't feel safe. We can't deny people's experience and shut down the conversation and go, what about there's women in prison too?
Yeah.
So women are perpetrators of violence too, occasionally. But this isn't what we're talking about.
Yeah. No, and you know, you're all making some amazing points. And I mean, you know, I think it's really, really, really interesting because, you know, there's a couple of things from everything that you've all said that I've kind of gone to in my head, which is, but is it just men? Because one of the things that I found really, really interesting from our Women's Voices event back in November, there were a few women who said actually some of their biggest challenges have been women. And that actually, so I then go to a place of, if men are struggling, you know, to put themselves forward because of judgment and everything else, you know, actually women similarly, and young women especially, you know, are struggling to do much the same. And it's like, there's something in that for me that actually, so back to the point, you know, that, you know, I say often that we're actually more similar than we are different, but because we don't have those open, honest conversations, actually we don't learn that, you know, because we just assume it's all very different, and yet actually it's not that different. And so I sort of kind of go then to sort of like the bigger point of, you know, absolutely, and I think Matt will agree with everything that you said about trying to get people into a room because of the work that we did at the end of last year. And, you know, we did manage to get, I think, 35 men in a room. But, you know, beyond that, we're still working on it. And I wonder, you know, I mean, there's a couple of guys who speak quite openly about meeting people where they are at and going to sort of like the barber shop and kind of cutting down the, you know, it's a slightly different context situation that they're talking about, but, you know, I wonder whether it is therefore about not making it a big thing, and we make it about the big moments. And so I go back to, we talked about adolescence, manosphere, and it then becomes so big that it then becomes beyond manageable, and that holding that line when you've got the rest of life's chaos going on in the background, because let's face it, we've all got lives beyond this. This is not, and we then hear this whole thing like adolescence and the whole thing about manosphere, and then we go, oh, you know, so, you know, it dies down in the press, and then we carry on with life. But actually, I think it's really, really in the small moments, and it's those things that we hold the line, need to start holding the line with. And I think women have as much a role to play as men do. I'll give you an example. So, as you know, we've been rolling out safe havens in the local area down here. So I joined our local councillor, 2 of the beat officers, and somebody else who is part of the whole initiative. Anyway, we went into various different venues, and one of the girls raised the point that they had a man in the venue, it's a fish and chip shop, upskirting somebody, a girl, clearly a young woman. The young woman didn't want to do anything about it. The manager of the shop, which was a woman, was saying, I really think you should do, but they played it down because it wasn't that bad. And, you know, so, but just because of the environment that we had, the conversation, I was there, beat officers were there, they'd not had this conversation before, and suddenly between us, it was a moment where we'd met her where it was at. That suddenly became, we were holding the line in that small moment that went from her then not reporting, not engaging, to actually doing something about it. And actually we have a great success because Kent Police are actually going to do a whole campaign around the small moments and why they matter so much, because the small moments build, and it's totally on the back of that. And so I guess I come back to this thing of, are we trying to make it too big and actually not realize what we can already do within our small circles? And that's why it feels so hard to actually do. I don't know, just my curly whirly brain thinking in many different directions simultaneously as usual.
That's really interesting and probably quite apt, Laura. Like, you know, Dan, I'm not surprised at all when you put that into the group. You got tumbleweed. Not at all surprised. In fact, it's what I expected you were going to get. I would have been at the same hope, going, "Oh yeah, lads, let's have this chat," you know. But because to Laura's point there, that didn't feel like a moment. That felt like something very big. You know, if you think of it, so you want me to cross the line into a group of women and talk about this? I don't know how to do that. I don't know. I'm not prepared to do that. What's that going to mean for me? So, how, to your point, Laura, so what we need to now do then is create the moments to have that conversation. So, how do we create that moment? Like, what is like even like Dan? If I got that message from you, you know, I would be thinking, geez, do I want to do that? Like, do I want to go into that group? Like,
that's how we reacted, Mark, actually, when Laura first said to us.
Completely. Because you knew me, though, and we'd done a whole load of lives previously that you were willing to do it. And I guess that's the point, is there's a trust in there, but there's still quite a large, what I call a friction point, that's still got to get over for people to make that next leap. And I think the smaller the step that you can make it to take that first one, and it might not be the right first step, it's taking a step sufficiently large enough that makes you feel like you're making some level of momentum. And then when you start getting, oh, actually, this is not as bad as I thought, suddenly it builds, and then suddenly you're actually okay to step in that. And that is where conversation for me is so crucial. And this just being, you know, curious, and Thomas has said, be curious with good intention. And that's right, because the curiosity is to step in there and kind of basically just see where somebody is at and kind of reframe in the moment. But, you know, who has time for conversation now? That's the other thing, is the conversations all at the other end of it like this. And of course, that in and of itself is a whole challenge, because that is prone to misinterpretation. Because we're you know, that's if predictive text hasn't ruined half of what you were sending anyway. But yeah, I don't know, Matt, thoughts?
I mean, I think Mark's hit the nail on the head a little bit there with how do you start the conversation, because that's what I'm really struggling with. Like, I was just taking a look, and look, it's not my place, this isn't meant to be a criticism of the work that she's doing, but there's a lady online, Amy Watson, right, who runs Hassel, and I've seen her a bit on TV, and she's got a very big presence online, and she's creating a very good movement. She's getting allies to sign up and say, I don't want to be part of the problem, I want to be part of the solution. And that's great, and I'm not going to knock that in any way, shape or form. However, the way that she's chosen to start that conversation, which clearly is working on one level because she's getting lots of people signing up to take part in that discussion, I'm also worried is also putting a hell of a lot of people off, because I've looked at some of her recent posts. I was just literally triggering my memory by having a look here now, and there's posts around not all men, but, and then calling out the significant volumes, and then some stuff on the dark web that's been in the news recently about conversations about men sharing some obviously vile stuff about how to drug your wife or girlfriend or something that hit the news briefly. Who am I to say that it's not her right to call that out? Because that stuff is horrific. However, in calling it out in that way, she's also going to put everyone's backs up, as we've sort of seen with Mark. It's not me. Why are you calling me out? That's not fair. And I have done a lot of work, like Dan has, to get to the point where I can put my hand up and go, I've crossed the line. I can honestly, hand and heart, say I've never crossed the line with bad intention, but I have crossed the line with good intention, but still crossed the line. And even I am looking at those sort of posts and going, ooh, that's not great. So it's like how do you start the conversation? It's a really difficult one, because media responds to noise and controversy, but noise and controversy is going to turn people off. It's a very difficult balance.
Yeah, and you want as many people in the conversation as possible. You want the conversation to be reasonable. You want people to not involved in the conversation to not feel attacked, to not feel judged, and to not feel blamed. Whereas, and I think this is what happened with Mark's post, actually, was it was a very simple message. But the trouble is, the simple message doesn't get it, does it? Because life isn't black and white, it's nuanced, it's grey areas. So whilst Mark's intention in when posting that message was great, he wanted to start a debate, right? Here's how women feel. They feel like if there was no men, they could leave the house whenever they wanted, they could go wherever they wanted. Do you know what I mean? But it's not realistic. We're never going to have no men. And actually, if we could just get rid of the ones that are the problem, right, then maybe we'd be all right. But then what side of the line are the ones with it? Do you know what I mean? And it's like, so what do we do in order to tackle this? What exactly is the problem? Do we even know what that is? Do we know what the problem is? Do we know what the cause is? Do we know how we can intervene early to make sure our young boys and our young men aren't becoming predators? Or, you know, what is the problem? Is it genetic? Is it psychopathy? Is it the culture? And
but Dan, that's exactly it. We don't hang around long enough to actually listen to one another. So she butting in over you. So, I didn't hold the line there, but that's me who genuinely, we are so lost in the noise. We can't see the wood for the trees. We're so reactive. We're chasing a problem, but actually we've got the wrong bloody problem. You know, so we're trying to find solutions for that problem, but actually, because we haven't really understood what's going on beneath the noise, it's, you know, I see what happened is underneath. You know, what do we do that? And it's like, how do we change that? And the only way you can change that is when you get this shared understanding. And it has, you know, you have to go through that hairdryer moment first in some conversations to understand what's the other side of it. Otherwise, where does that go? You know, and I'm a firm believer that, you know, what's the phrase in NLP that goes, you know, something along the lines of, you know, there is no, it's not bad behavior. There's a phrase that's basically, you know, we never set out to do something with ill intention.
Yes, and there's no such thing as bad people, just bad behavior, something like that, isn't it?
It's something like that, but you know, it's just because the lens of the world that you see it on. I'll have to come back to what the phrase is, but there is definitely something like that. And you know, for me, it's, you know, as part of that, it's so important that, you know, people understand where they sit within it. You know, I'm reading some of the comments on here, but you know, it's how can we make it so it's, you know, I'm not saying a level playing field, but so it's a playing field in which we can understand the game that we're playing and the rules that we're playing alongside with, you know, and at this point I don't feel that's where we are.
But does it come to the point where we're talking about holding the line? Well, we need to understand where the line is. What is the line? What does the line look like? You know, is you know, to give a very simplistic image, is the line is it like hands across the line, holding hands, like, you know, welcome to this side to understand, you know, and you're welcome to here to understand. To the point there, the LinkedIn user, I don't know who that is. I think people want to see themselves in the conversation. We have spoken quite a bit about the need to call people in as opposed to call them out. So maybe we need to define where that line is as much as possible, because it's very grey. Like, what is that line? Where are we standing? Which part are we on? You know, like, we can't deny people's lived realities, but we also can't accept the situation that is as it is. So therefore, the line And the line has to be something that challenges, because it's very hard for us to just, go, oh, that's fine, then I'll do that, because we need to be challenged in some way to accept that there's, a place we have to go to, a journey. So maybe that line is a step, couple of steps beyond, but we have to want to reach that line. We have to want to get to that line, and I know we should want to get to that line as someone who has wives and daughters and, has mothers and sisters and friends and everything else. But I think the part of us that doesn't want to get to that line is the part of us that's comfortable where we are. And the status quo is nice in some ways too, because it's easier for us, because it's like it becomes a larger debate about, oh, what do I lose and all this kind of things, as opposed to we don't lose anything. Like, the reality is you don't lose anything. It's just everyone else gains,
Yeah. And I think, Steve's written, it just comes up as a LinkedIn user, so I was just checking who it was. But I think this is, exactly what you're saying, is that actually we all have a responsibility to hold the line. It's not just one person's responsibility in a room, it's the collective responsibility here. And as Steve goes on to say, he agrees, where is the line and how does it challenge us? But I guess it's going to be different for every one of us, because we'll have different experiences, and therefore what is the easiest first step that means you're going to do something? But surely isn't it just taking the first step to hold that line, rather than just going, well, this is what I've got to do? I don't know. Have I made it that's too simple?
No, I think it is that simple, Laura, isn't it? And I think step one is we must do something.
Yeah.
That it is everybody's responsibility, men and women, as you've said, Laura. Because it's everybody's responsibility to start not accepting anything that is the wrong side of the line. And it's difficult, isn't it? Because like in that situation you described there, where in that moment that young girl thought, well, it's not that bad, he just took a picture up my skirt, I'm okay. But then it's looking at it from a wider perspective, isn't it, and going, well, actually, where does that stop? If that's okay, then what's he going to do next, and so on. But it starts with us all looking at the world and going, is this what we want? Is this how we look? Is this what we want? Is this what do we want? Women living in fear, not feeling they can't live their lives, do what they want, go where they want, because they're living in fear? No, we don't want that. Do we want the highest rise in violent crime to be violence against women and girls? No, we don't. We don't want that. So every single one of us, I'm not pointing fingers, I'm not saying men or women, every single one of us has to say now, what can I do? What can I do about this? How can I start a conversation? Do I have a conversation with my children about this? Do I have a conversation with my partner about this? Do I have a conversation with my friends about this? What can we do? What small steps can we do? What small things can we stop accepting? Because culture won't change unless we want it to, and unless we're prepared to do something about it. And that doesn't mean that any of us have got to put ourselves in dangerous situations or get so far out of our comfort zone we don't know where we are and what we're doing. But it is going to challenge us. It is going to be uncomfortable. It is going to be unfamiliar, because this has been the status quo, hasn't it, for hundreds of years. But we don't want it anymore. None of us wants this.
No.
So, and you're right, Laura. I think these big conversations and the stuff in the press and all the fuss around it that comes and it goes, and us everyday Joes in our everyday lives, how does that actually relate to me? How does that relate to my life, to my family, to my friends, to my community? And what small things can I do? Can I take responsibility for, which is going to make a difference? Is going to make a change? Every one of us has that responsibility. We can't keep leaving it to somebody else. We can't keep pointing the finger saying it's them. It's their job. It ain't me, Gov. It's not good enough. It doesn't cut it.
No.
But because we should be feeling guilty or because we're blaming anybody other than the perpetrators of these things, but because we don't want our culture to be this way anymore. And unless we all accept that we've got to do something about it, nothing will change.
No, I'm totally with you, Dan, because I think for me this is not a one person thing. I mean, I was reading one of the comments here. Every single time it's either 100% agree or I am the problem, and there needs to be a greater understanding that if we shun men for entering the conversation, it's just women attempting to solve the problem. And I mean, look, this is exactly why this conversation has happened, because we will not move on unless we have this open discussion. Because for me, it's absolutely around, culture, building culture where people are not afraid to step in. And I mean that women and men. And, because at the moment, I think you could probably pretty much safely say that, it's not safe to do that. And then we wonder why people don't step in. These rooms are, and it is tumbleweed. So I think what we're actually talking about is how do we rebuild this sense of community connection, where there is this sense of belonging, shared ownership, and common responsibility, where we have this sort of people feeling part of something, because that's what this is for me. That's why I started this conversation, because there's I can't remember, sorry, one of you said, but there's no point in us having conversations and just shouting into a vacuum and hoping that if we shout louder, something's going to happen, because no change is going to happen by shouting louder. Not sustainable stuff. It's actually the quiet moments where we're taking steps. Maybe therefore, what do we think would change if we just had and gave ourselves that permission to just start with a small moment, whatever that is, for any one of us, that we do something different next time. So maybe it's not about, big, bold steps that only certain people can hold the line. I think we all have a responsibility. So I don't know, but I guess the one thing I would say is that we can't ignore this, much to all the points that you've all shared. It just won't cut anymore. And the silence is not enough. Last thoughts from you all before we close.
Well, I have to run right now, Laura, but I just like to say, and there's a couple of interesting comments there in the comments, and I can't see who actually said them. It just says LinkedIn user on my side, but if I think about having conversations with my wife over the years, and sometimes the conversation was repeated, she was having to make the same point to me again, and I would defend myself by saying, because I'm trying to learn, I'm trying to understand, I'm trying to get better. And I think as long as we're trying to get better, we're moving in some direction, and I'm not going to get it right, and we're not going to get it right all the time, and we know we're not going to get it right. But if we are called out for being wrong, we're trying to get it right, well, that's not going to help. We need to be called in saying, well, actually, this is the better way to do it. This is what I really mean. Okay, good. I'm learning. So we have to keep learning, and maybe learning until we've learned. And it's an understanding on both sides until we meet. I don't think we have to meet in the middle. I think we have a bit harder to travel on our side, But I think that's where we go.
Maybe.
I love your point on moments.
It's got to be less adversarial. What the thing that strikes me about Mark's post and the comments on it, it just became name calling and mudslinging. Yeah. That's never going to get us anywhere. We're all adults, right? So it's got to be less adversarial. We've got to be curious and try and understand. Anyway, Laura, I think the guys need to go.
Yeah, I have to run, guys.
As ever, I will let you go, and we will see you next month when we've worked out which day it's going to be. So enjoy, have a great evening, and thanks for joining us, as ever.
Thanks, all.
Thank you.